Hi, everybody. It's Maria Boynton. Thanks so much for joining me. My guests today are here, and we're talking to Gerald Griggs, who is representing the NAACP, a civil rights attorney, along with Lee Merritt, who represents the estate for the family of Ahmaud Arbery. Sirs, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Of course, we're talking about Ahmaud Arbery, the young 25-year-old African-American man was shot. It happened in February 2020. He was jogging right in the town of Brunswick, in a neighborhood right on the outskirts of Brunswick, when two men, the McMichaels, followed him in their pickup truck. A neighbor followed along and, of course, filmed it all. So, Attorney Merritt, we had some breaking news here today when the former DA in that particular circuit is now indicted. How significant is that?
It is hugely significant. I can say in my civil rights practice and even in my studies of case precedent, we rarely see a prosecutor held accountable for her participation in covering up this kind of crime. Mr. Griggs and I, we say all the time that racism is a team sport, and institutional racism is not only the actions of the person behind the trigger, or Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, or William Ryan Brody, but they were able to get away with it for 30 days without any real criminal investigation, 72 days without an arrest, because the legal system decided that Ahmaud Arbery's life didn't matter. And Jackie Johnson was the embodiment of that. And for a long time in our communities, we've bemoaned that, but there didn't seem to be any consequences for that action. And I think this will send a chilling effect to prosecutors who may tend to abuse that office.
So thank you, Lee Merritt. So Gerald Griggs, we look back on the summer of 2020 and we look at this particular case here, the Ahmaud Arbery death case, where three men are now charged with murder. The trial is getting ready to start soon, and we'll talk about that shortly. So Attorney Griggs, representing the NAACP, you all were down there from the time that we learned that there was a situation in Brunswick, Georgia. So from then until now, what do you say about the progression of this case?
I say, first off, thank you to the people of Brunswick, Georgia, Glenn County, especially Wanda Cooper Jones, for bringing this to the NAACP's attention, but just having the courage to continue to run with this family. And it's because of the pressure of the citizens of that community and a family that has been pleading for justice for such a long time that we've even gotten this far. Jackie Johnson and George Barnhill tried to cover this up. William Roddy Bryant and Travis and Gregory McMichael tried to get away with hunting a man and shooting him when he was merely jogging. And so this is a testament to the will of the people of Glenn County, of Brunswick, Georgia, but as well as the rest of Georgia, to show the entire world how we do this. If we remember the summer of 2020, the activism started in Glenn County, in Brunswick, Georgia. And so that's why we are on this path. So I'm hopeful for what's going to happen in October. And I'm thankful to Attorney General Carr for hearing the voice of this family and the voice of the community and indicting this individual. But there are others that helped in this cover up, and we need complete justice.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about a former Georgia DA indicted by a grand jury, which said that the former DA showed preference to the men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery last year. My guests here are Lee Merritt, who represents the estate, and Gerald Griggs, who is representing the NAACP. So we talk about the former prosecutor, Jacqueline Lee Johnson, indicted on charges of violation of oath of public office and obstruction of a police officer. And the Georgia Attorney General, Chris Carr, announced that Johnson was the Brunswick Judicial Circuit DA when the 25-year-old Arbery, a Black man, was shot February 2020, and Johnson ultimately lost re-election in November. And that, of course, spoke volumes when you talk about thanking the people, Gerald Griggs. Just her losing the election spoke volumes then, right?
It absolutely did. And what happened was the people galvanized around this case, and they started organizing. They started not only protesting in the streets, but they started registering to vote and getting out to vote and making sure she was removed from office through an election. but they didn't want just her removal from office. They wanted her to face ramifications, both with her bar license, but as well as criminal charges. And that's what we are seeing this process continue because of the activism around this case by members down in Brunswick, Georgia, people in Atlanta. We had motorcades that went down there. We had protests, but we were all trying to elevate the voice for justice and the call for justice by this family.
Attorney Merritt, with the indictment of Johnson, I mean, what is the family feeling right now?
There's a great sense of relief for the family, and I encourage you to join the family in a press conference in the morning that they're holding, just because they want to thank the public for everyone who has continued to fight for them. It's worth noting, I can recall when before the video of this horrific crime came out, Mr. Griggs and I was discussing it. And the family had at that point retained my office, and Mr. Griggs and I had worked together for years. And the NAACP investigation had already found evidence that Jackie Johnson instructed law enforcement officers not to make an arrest in the case. And of course, that was before the video came out. And once the video came out, the focus became the McMichaels and William Roddy Bryan, which I think was appropriate. But it was unfinished business to go back and hold Jackie Johnson accountable. It's something that Wanda Cooper and Marcus have been thinking about since their son was murdered, because when they wanted answers, the system that was responsible for giving them answers about who would be held accountable was the prosecutors. And they had doors slammed in their face over and over again, first by Jackie Johnson and then by Barnhill. And it's important to note that the reason that Jackie Johnson was indicted today was because she first consulted with George Barnhill. She didn't tell anyone that she first consulted and said, "Hey, how do I help get my friend off?" And what he suggested was that she should just pass the case on to him, who he also had improper relationships with George Barnhill, who was a personal friend, a social media friend, and Gregory McMichael's son actually worked in George Barnhill's office. All things discovered both by the NAACP and by the diligence of Jackie Johnson, Wanda Cooper in the Brunswick community.
We talk about the diligence of Wanda Cooper, and Gerald, we talk about just the community coming out. How unprecedented is what we are seeing happen, especially with today's indictment?
It's the first time I can remember, and having practiced law in a long time here in Georgia, that a sitting district attorney or a former sitting district attorney was indicted this quickly. So it speaks volumes to the courageousness of Mr. Arbery's family for continuing this press. And as Lee said, I can remember having these conversations with him prior to the video coming out, strategizing how we're going to get the community involved, and of course the NAACP doing its investigation. So this is what it looks like when community gathers around an issue and uplifts a family. And so I'm ecstatic that it's happened this fast, but I'm also angered that it took a family having to beg and plead and an outside organization have to do an investigation and lawyers having to come around and force the system to work appropriately. But this is what happens when we are engaged for justice. And this is what we're going to continue to do all the way to the end. And we're going to continue to run that extra mile with Ahmaud and make sure justice happens.
Pre-trial, the judge made some decisions this week, one being that Ahmaud Arbery's prior run-ins with the law enforcement would not be admissible, and some other rulings as well. So Attorney Lee Merritt, when we talk about things that are not admissible now, how is the family feeling in terms of the upcoming trial? It's almost here, October 10th.
Well, in addition to those failures in the system that this indictment begins to address, the failure of the prosecutors to do their job and sort of leaving the family in the dark, the other most frustrating aspect of this kind of case, of a wrongful death case, of a murder case, is the second death, is what we call in the social, amongst civil rights attorneys. The second death is the death of Ahmaud Arbery's name that we expected to take place at the trial, where they begin to drag every wrong deed, every misstep that he's ever had, and say that somehow what he did in middle school justified his murder some 5-10 years later. And the defense made very clear that they planned to go down that road. They began to bring up shoplifting incidents, high school incidents, and submitting it all into evidence for the court to consider whether or not that would unfairly prejudice the jury, or if that's something that should go before the court. The court's decision, the right decision, was that information had no relevance to why these men killed Ahmaud Arbery on a sunny day in February of 2020. And so we're very relieved that that evidence isn't going forward. We have seen, unfortunately, defense attorneys successfully put the decedent on trial and use that to exonerate their clients.
And also the neighbor is going to be allowed to testify before trial because for health reasons. And that neighbor is the one that the defendants claim had told them to watch his property. So Gerald Griggs, when you look at the neighbor now seeming to contradict, it seems, what they've been saying.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things we turned up in our investigation. We went down to Brunswick several times and we canvassed the neighborhood. Larry English has always stated from the very beginning that Travis and Gregory McMichael had no permission to do anything on behalf of him or his property. So that's one of the inconsistencies that will probably come out in the trial. And because of his health conditions, he's going to be allowed to testify before the trial, and it will be tape recorded and played to the jury with cross-examination by the defense attorneys. So I think that that's appropriate and it's necessary to make sure that there's justice in this case. And to kind of answer your other question about the ruling that the judge made, in a criminal matter, the character of the victim is never relevant unless there was some prior altercation with those defendants that would call into question that issue. What Ahmaud did when he was in middle school or high school, or even 3 years ago, that the defendants did not know about is not relevant. So I think that the judge made the appropriate decision here. We're not going to try his character. His character is not at issue in this case. Only thing that's at issue is what happened on that day in Scintilla Shores, and what happened on that day in Scintilla Shores was a murder.
Okay. So when we talk about the trial is coming up on October 10th, Mr. Merritt, you optimistic considering all these rulings that have seemingly gone into the prosecution's favor?
I'm cautiously optimistic. This case is going to be tried in South Brunswick, Georgia, where this really terrible incident. Pardon me, I'm so sorry.
Okay, the White House says there are about 100 Americans left in it.
Where this really terrible incident took place and went unaccounted for almost 2 months. This is a different part of the country, so the Deep South, and finding a jury pool that both hadn't heard of this case, hadn't developed an opinion about this case, and who will honestly, fairly just hear the evidence and come back with a verdict is going to be an uphill battle. We expect jury selection to take course over at least a week, or at least amount of them similar to the amount of time that we saw in George Floyd's case. And they may have to bring in additional rounds of jurors because this is one of the most televised, most paid attention to cases in the history of this country. And so it's going to be difficult to find jurors who can honestly say, they have not heard or developed an opinion about what happened to Ahmaud Arbery.
So in the coming weeks, up until October 10th, what do we expect to happen during that period of time?
In the coming weeks, there will be some motions filed about, or pre-trial motions about what might, and this is going to be important to the extent that they're televised, what might open the door to the evidence that the court says doesn't come in. Because just because the court says certain evidence doesn't come in, that doesn't mean that a witness can't take the stand and set something off, say something that triggers the right of the defendants to rebut that statement with the kind of prejudicial evidence the court says should not be allowed in the court. So there'll be hearings and motion practice back and forth about that. And as far as the family is concerned, they are waiting and praying and really biding their time to this trial, which they're really looking forward to.
Thank you very much, Lee Merritt. Gerald Griggs, final words. The community has been there since summer 2020, since we learned about Ahmaud Arbery's death. What do you do now?
We continue to support this family. As Leah said, this is one of the most high-profile cases in the country. It's clearly the most high-profile case in Georgia in a very, very long time. So we have to continue to activate and to elevate this case for justice, and to continue to remind people that we have to run the continued race all the way to the end. So, you know, I think that we are going
Not
to.
too bad. I'm gonna log off this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Gerald.
Mr. Merritt, we understand you have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But I just think we have to make sure that people understand that this is a race that we have to run, that we have to be engaged. We will be present on the ground for the entire trial, and we will make sure that there's a fair process here.
All righty. Gerald Griggs, thank you so much. To Lee Merritt as well, the attorney for the estate of Ahmaud Arbery. I want to thank you both for your time this evening. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Maria Boynton.